The lights are a bit bright in the face, so I can't see everybody really clearly, but thank you ever so much for being here. There is a good crowd. You spread out, but there's enough to maybe fill the Adelphi on a good night, so that's not bad. My name's Alan Raw. I am a presenter for BBC Introducing and spent a couple of decades as a session drummer as well. Still occasionally play in a band called End of Level Baddie with a guy sat there called End of Level Baddie in a white hat that says Baddie on it, who I didn't know was going to be here. It's very nice to see you, sir. The thing with BBC Introducing is we get asked to do all kinds of interesting things and meet lots of very interesting people, and we gather lots of information as we go along and then share as much as we can of it in a couple of hours when we're on the air. It's never enough, and people want us to play all the music, so we don't get to do very long interviews or hear from these experts in a big way. So this is a great opportunity for me and for you to get a little bit more in depth. So we'll start at that end, and I'd like you to introduce yourselves if you could, and just give us one interesting thing about a highlight of your career so far, if you don't mind.
Oh,
it isn't good enough. I'll throw in one of the ones I know about you.
My name's Russ Cottier. I present for recordproduction.com as well, but I'm a record producer by day. And one interesting thing, I've made violins for the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra out of electricity meters.
That's pretty impressive.
Hi, my name's Gary Bromham. I started as an assistant engineer at Trident Studios. I've worked with artists, I don't know, Sheryl Crow, George Michael. I'm currently also a researcher at Queen Mary University, looking at the role of intelligent music production systems, what we do.
You, sir.
Hi, my name's Joss Worthington. I run a studio in Halifax called Distant City Studios, residential studio. Been working with bands recently, like Lanterns on the Lake, The Membranes, Callum Beatty. But I'm also a musician, songwriter. I've had songs used on TV and things like that. Played in many bands in and around Leeds and Manchester. And I also remember playing on your show with my band Western Suburbs about
My name's Ian Shepherd. I'm a mastering engineer. I have a podcast called The Mastering Show, a website called Production Advice. Better result putting mastering music. Constantly banging on about loudness and the loudness wars, and started an event called Dynamic Range Day to help raise awareness of it. And more recently, I've been doing plugins with meter plugs. The most recent of which is called Loudness Penalty and tells you how much your music will get turned down or up if you upload it to a popular streaming service. And I know this is a highlight of my career, but I was in an Imogen Heap video inside a giant oxygen-filled bubble wearing a toga made of tinfoil.
I can't beat that. My name's Mike Exeter. I'm a freelance mixer. I suppose the highlight of my career has been working with the legends Black Sabbath and the creator of heavy metal for a good old 22 years. So through that, I sort of headed into the heavy metal side of things and rock. But my career illustriously started with the Mickey Mouse Club back in 1992 with notables such as Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears. So I've done the whole gamut of Mickey Mouse Club and Disney through reggae and onto heavy rock and beyond. So I've had quite an interesting career so far.
Thanks very much. In some kind of strange symmetry, you've also worked with the Royal Philharmonic. Thank you for placing yourself in this position. So the kind of things that we want to be getting started with really is we'll get the kind of history stuff out of the way first, and then we can get to people's questions. So one question to everybody to go around, and that is, how did you get to be doing what you are doing? And because I'm sure you could have been doing something else, possibly more profitable as well. But you ended up doing this. Why? Starting with yourself, sir.
I was a keyboard player, and in the 70s, you could only really bring around Hammond organs, Fender Rhodes, or pianos, so there wasn't much point in me joining a band. So I eventually ended up thinking there must be something else I can do in the music business, and eventually, when I left school, decided to go down the route of engineering, production, wherever it would take me. So I went to a place called Full Sail in Florida and did a degree out there. And that was enough to get me in touch with the right people, to get experience, the right tuition. And from that point, straight out of school, I went into interning for 3 months at a studio, and then I ended up in upstate New York for a year. Came back to England, and just as many things have happened in my life, right place at the right time, I got involved in a studio in Birmingham, and that just set me off on my career. Once I'd been there a few years, I went freelance, and that's about 21 years ago I've been since I went freelance. So yeah, it was just an easy go and do it, learn about the industry and see where it takes me. Been lucky so far.
So I wanted to work in a studio pretty much straight out of college. I remember being at college and studying physics and music and just getting depressed. I thought, well, now what do I do? Because there weren't any courses like this one back in the day, or very few. And then it occurred to me that I could work in a studio, and then I cheered up again. And I was lucky. I worked for free at a little studio around the corner from where my parents lived, in Lowestoft on the East Coast, tiny little community studio, and did the traditional thing of sending out letters to maybe 100 different studios. I'd made the decision I didn't want to work in London, which was brave with hindsight. It's kind of maybe easier in that respect these days, where it's not so focused in the capital. And I was just lucky that one of those letters, somebody called up, and they called the studio where I'd been working for free, and asked to be put in touch with me. And the chap there, lovely guy called Paul Hobbs, said, I don't want to tell you where he is because I want to employ him, which is probably the best reference you can get. I don't know if I deserved it. But because he was also a really nice guy, he then said, but I can't afford to, so I will tell you where he is. And I had applied to this company, Sound Recording Technology, SRT, which sadly is more, thinking it was a cassette duplication plant. So it wasn't my dream job, it was just in the industry. And it turned out that they were a mastering studio, and they had just landed a 120 album contract with the Royal Philharmonic. And so I worked there for 15 years. But in terms of what I'm doing now, I did mastering the whole time I was there. I did some recording and mixing. Then I got into enhanced CDs, which was putting QuickTime videos onto the end of CDs because there wasn't the internet then. From that, I moved into DVDs, and at the point where I said, we should be doing Blu-ray, the company weren't interested, so I left the setup on my own. And then they went bust, which is why they couldn't get into Blu-ray, which, that's a shame. But and so since then, I had already started experimenting with the blog at that point to try and raise interest, get clients. So I just kind of put my foot on the gas with that. The rest of it I've just learned from Google.
And ended up getting awards for your software as well, which is fabulous.
Yeah, eventually, yeah. We could talk about that maybe a little bit later.
Yeah, sure. Over to yourself, sir. Now, was it musician first, or?
I was a musician and recorded the first few demos from a band studio, and just wasn't particularly crazy with the results, so started experimenting with home recording, bedroom, and kind of more into that, even though it was incredibly lo-fi. And sort of developed a relationship with an engineer at a local studio and started recording things at a bit more higher fidelity. And that just kind of progressed, and after a while, the studio manager was wanting to get out, and I was kind of wanting to get in, and I ended up getting in studio work just more as a manager to begin with, but then the main engineer started he was originally from Cornwall and needed to move back, and there was a lot of work, and there needed to be an engineer, and I had to throw myself here really, and although I'd done home recording, a bit of a baptism of fire really, so I just kind of threw myself into it, and there was enough work to keep me going, and then really it's just been always a case of me as a musician trying to find a certain sound as a songwriter and a producer, and trying to develop that and trying to understand the art of record production really, and it's just been a slow progress. Not really.
Thanks very much. We will introduce our extra guest in a minute, but he deserves a big introduction, so we'll just carry on round as to where we were. I'll just say that I'm a live sound engineer for BBC Introducing in Leeds, and it's been 10 years of doing that, simply because, same reason, there was somebody doing it, they left, they didn't have anybody else. You just fall into these things, don't you? Over to yourself.
So I guess the two enduring words here so far are probably luck and also timing. So for me, actually, it was a tricky situation. My father played guitar with Screaming Lord Sutch. I don't know if any of you ever heard of Screaming Lord Sutch, and also Gino Washington. And so he just wanted to keep me as far away from the music business as possible. So I was actually taking an English literature degree, and without telling him, I went to, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a minute, I went to Trident Studios, and I was just a T-boy there, progressed to a tape-op as traditional kind of route. I guess for me, the thing was, I kind of came into the studio around that kind of very transitional period where we were transitioning between analog and digital. So for me, I was very interested in the technology that was associated with that. I used to program the Fairlight. I don't know if any of you have crossed the Fairlight, so I used to do a lot of Fairlight programming. That actually was great for me because I was in demand. There weren't very many people who could use that. But I guess my lucky break in terms of production was whilst working at Trident. I met a guitarist called Alan Murphy. I don't know if any of you ever heard of him. Kate Bush, and I think he also played Go West as well. And Al came in one day and said, do you want to go to, would you like to go to Iceland? I wasn't sure whether he meant the supermarket chain actually, but I thought, okay, we'll check this one out. And I went up to work in Reykjavik, and I worked with Mezza Forte. I did their Eurovision entry, and I worked with Björk as well whilst I was up there. And I have to say, I was completely out of my depth. And I literally did most of my learning on the job. And I thought, well, if I mess this up, maybe no one will notice this. So, and I really learnt on the job, I guess. So, really, that's my story.
Well, I wanted to be a vet. I wanted to be a vet so much, I went to uni for 2 years after taking a year out after school and cleaning up all sorts of things that vet students clean up, and working in vets. And but you know, I had the music thing in the background, and everybody thought it was going to be a job. And then I did 2 years of veterinary science, and I thought to myself, this is not my life. This is not what I want to do. And I'm sure there's probably some people here anyone changed course? Yeah, there's hands. Yeah, it's cool. It'll work out. It'll be all right. You might not make it rich. I mean, I'm still trying. But so what did I do? I went to do a degree in sound recording after that, University of Sheffield. And I came out of that with a first. Great. Loads of experience of working on tape, which was cool because it was kind of the end of the tape era. And no idea what to do for a job. So I just hit up all the local studios, started doing live sound, all that kind of thing, and worked in a few sort of, let's say small, rundown type studios for a while. And then eventually, a couple of years later, decided I was going to go freelance on my own because, as you might have guessed, I'm from the northwest of England, and there's not a vast amount of work coming into the studios there. So it made sense to go freelance. And I kind of made a promise to myself that I'd choose the most interesting projects. So, I mean, this was probably 2006 that I went freelance, something like that. And since then, I've been doing really crazy projects. I've been, like I say, making instruments and producing the Royal Philharmonic, playing electricity and gas meters, going around Europe doing records for rock musicals and all sorts of stuff like that. I have a YouTube channel. I have a small mixing desk company, and I also write for Resolution magazine. And all of those things just sort of came to me, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to embrace this and do it. And it makes for an interesting life, if not a stable life, unfortunately. But I think all of the guys, Well, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Puns from Mr. Exeter. So that's a potted history of my career. Everything from Sly and Robbie on tape restoration and making crazy instruments to all sorts of stuff.
Just the fact you work with Sly and Robbie just sort of elevates you in my book.
That was very early on, actually.
Yeah.
That was the first commercial record that I did.
Wow.
But,
That's a
yeah.
good way to start.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll carry on. Somebody on the panel worked with the Beatles on the White Album and worked with Ziggy Stardust, with Bowie. Who could that have been? Could have been Ken Scott on the end there. Welcome to the panel, Ken.
Hi there.
Just give us a few more highlights of your career and then answer the question everyone else has been answering, which is, how did you get into doing this then?
I knew what I wanted to do at the age of 12 and a half. I got a tape recorder for Christmas, and I fell in love with tape. Fell in love with the smell of it, the feel of it, what you could do with it, the editing. So after some investigation, which wasn't Googling at that point, it was a whole different way of finding things out, I found out that what I wanted to be was a recording engineer. I was at school. I found out that the only way I could become a recording engineer was to go to university, get an electronics degree, and go and work for the BBC. That didn't enthrall me too much because I hated school. But I kept going, and I was 16, I was taking mock exams, and I decided I can't take another exam. I've had it, I've got to get out of here. So one Friday, I wrote 10 letters, mailed them out on the Saturday, heard back from one place on the Tuesday. They wanted to interview me the next day. So I crossed London and went to this building that it was built in the 1850s. Was interviewed, heard from them on the Friday that I'd passed the interview. They wanted me to start the following Monday. So in 9 days, my life completely turned around and I started to work at the EMI recording studios, which today is probably the most famous recording studio in the world. It's Abbey Road. I started off in the tape library to learn how the studio worked. After about 3 or 4 months, I was promoted to assistant engineer, button pusher as we used to be called. And I sat behind a Telefunken 4-track 1-inch machine for my first ever session. And it happened to be side 2 of A Hard Day's Night with the Beatles. I worked with them from Hard Day's Night through Rubber Soul as an assistant engineer, amongst a multitude of other artists, both classical, pop, big band kind of thing. The great thing about that at Abbey Road, there were so many different styles of music, and they had 7 engineers there, probably the best in the world at that time, or amongst the best in the world at that time. There were 3 classical and 4 pop engineers. And as the assistant, I got to sit at the back of the studio, just looking after the tape machine, and I got to watch the mics that they used, where they positioned them, because they would all do it slightly differently. But more importantly, I got to see how the engineer related to the producer and how the engineer and producer related to the artist. Because I'm a firm believer that working in the studio, whether it be engineer, producer, 75% of it is personality driven. It's how you get on with the artist and the producer. If they don't trust you, they're going to be looking over your shoulder the entire time. And there's no worse feeling than that. You've got to get on with them. Make them feel comfortable with you so they trust you. And in doing that, you also learn what you're doing because they give you the freedom to experiment a little, which I got because after Rubber Soul, immediately after Rubber Soul, I got promoted to what back then was called disc cutting. Now it's mastering. Back then it was transferring from the tape to vinyl. Then after about 3 years, I think it was, of doing that, I got promoted to being a recording engineer. I got to sit behind a mixing console for the first time ever, not knowing what the hell I was doing. I knew I could push faders up and down. I knew I could turn knobs. What they actually did, I had no fucking. And it happened to be working on Magical Mystery Tour with the Beatles. Luckily, the first session I did, it was a track called Your Mother Should Know, and they'd been to another outside, an independent studio, to record it. Paul wanted to try a different arrangement, So that's what we did that day, and the arrangement didn't work. So the fact that I didn't know what I was doing and completely probably messed everything up didn't matter that much because it wasn't going to be used anyway. But because of working with them on the I think it's 4 albums as an assistant engineer, I built up a relationship with them enough that they would trust me, and I continued working with them as a recording engineer. And it was just a couple of days later that I got to do my first ever orchestral session, and that was for the orchestra and choir for I Am the Walrus. Talk about shitting oneself. It was, but managed to get through it. That continued. I worked with them more on Magical Mystery Tour, then the White Album, Jeff Beck, first album Truth, Procol Harum, Salty Dog, Lily the Pink by Scaffold, various things. Then, whilst doing the White Album, I got fired by the new manager at EMI, as it still was. I got my job back at EMI, but I knew he wanted me out, so I decided to make my own move. I moved to a studio called Trident. There, one of the first things I did there was All Things Was Past with George Harrison. Then did 2 albums with David Bowie as the engineer, the Space Oddity album and Man Who Sold the World, amongst many other things whilst I was there. I reached the point, engineering was becoming too easy for me. I had my learning, the learning curve working with the Beatles was absolutely astounding because it was working with the one band that they had no monetary or timing problems. They could take as long as they wanted to. There was no one going to come down hard on them. So there was that freedom. There was the fact that they never wanted anything to sound the same way twice. So using different mics, putting mics in different positions, all of these kind of things worked perfectly into what they wanted. So I as a young engineer learning my gig with the biggest band in the bloody world, allowed me the freedom to experiment all I wanted to and finding what mic worked for me, what EQ worked for me, where to position them. It was absolutely astounding. No one will ever have the ability that I had to learn my craft. So I got bored with just engineering. I knew how to get the sounds that I wanted to very easily. So I then wanted to have more of an artistic say. One of the things an engineer will find is that you'll be sitting beside the producer, and you'll say to the producer something like, you know what would sound great underneath that guitar solo? A herd of trumpeting elephants. The producer says, oh, okay, let's give it a try. You bring in the herd of trumpeting elephants. You record it. They go. If it worked, it was the producer's idea. If it didn't work, oh, it was only Ken's idea. I didn't think it would work anyway. Now, you reach a point where you get fed up with that, so you want to have more of the artistic say yourself, which is what happened with me. And I happened to be working with Bowie. He'd come in to produce a friend of his, and because I'd worked with him on 2 previous albums, I was put on the sessions for that. And during one of the tea breaks, I happened to say that I wanted to move into production. And he said, well, I've just signed with a new management, and they want to put me into the studio to record an album. I was going to produce it myself, but I don't know if I'm capable. Would you like to co-produce it with me? As if I'm going to say no. And that led to Hunky Dory, 3 other albums that I did with him, and many other things. And after 55 years, I still adore music. I'm a little bored with hearing the same thing time and time again, and especially things being auto-tuned and moved on the grid and things like that. But if you're into it, if you're willing to go through the ups and downs, which I'm sure there are so many ups and downs in this business. If you have any doubts whatsoever, if it's not the only thing you can conceive of doing, working in the music business, then get out now. Become an attorney, become a doctor, whatever. You've got to be able to It's got to be water off a duck's back. When you get all of the criticisms, when you get dumped, you do a lot for an act, and just as they sign the major deal, they move off to a big name producer. All of these kind of things. It feels like shit. But if you're doing the only thing you can possibly do, and that's work in this business, eventually something will come around, and it was all worthwhile. To hell with all of those things. I had the greatest feeling when that happened. And there is nothing better for me than being in the studio and having a bunch of musicians in the studio. I put the mics in place. I do a few things on the EQ, monitor the levels. And then I just sit back, put my feet up on the desk, and have the most amazing music wafting over me. Best drug in the world, as far as I'm concerned. That's after 55 years. So it's amazing. I hope
Thanks,
that
Ken.
was brief enough for you.
That's great.
Yeah, right, bye.
Okay, your turn. Stick your hand in the air so we can get an idea of who's here. Stick your hand in the air if you are a DJ. A couple. A producer. A smattering, perhaps 10, 12. A publisher. But there's no publisher. No. There are holes in the infrastructure of the music industry in the Hull area. There's no doubt about that. We know that already. Don't worry. Maybe perhaps you can plug some of them when you've studied. Who's in a band? Quite a lot of band members. That's good. Solo artists? Surprisingly loads. Right, yeah. Duos? Right, okay. Not even two put their hand up. That's okay. Has anybody got a label? Anybody work for a label? Starting a label? Some thoughts of starting a label. That's good. Distribution. Another hole in the infrastructure locally. And there is a bit, though. That's developing. And also, who's in press and media for music or anything? Nobody. Okay, that's really interesting. So the majority of people here are musicians and artists of one form or another, solos, bands, and producers, which is good. And does anybody just work in a studio? Yeah. Good.
Is it the best gig in the world?
Yeah. That's great. Well, it wouldn't take much for this many people to find employment for one person who works in the studio, so you should be in luck there. Okay, well, thanks for that. So we can gear a few questions around that, which would be useful. So one thing I need to ask then, building on what we just heard about relationships and trust in the studio, if people could tell me what it is that they need to notice about an artist if they think they're going to be able to work with them. And the alternative to that is, what do you hope they're going to be bringing to the studio? Over to you at the end there. Yeah. You got a studio in Liverpool. You could do this.
Well, yeah. So I'm mostly based at Parr Street in Liverpool, amongst other places. What do you look for in an artist?
Well, there's a load of artists here. There's lots of band members.
Well, they've got to be ravenous. They've got to be really, really want it and be working at their craft all the time. But the thing that I think the best example of what I look for in an artist is probably relayed by a story. I'd driven out to Cheshire to do a recording session in a little studio out there, and the session guitarist, he lived along the way, so I thought, I'll pick you up. Not worked with him before. Picked him up, did the session, great, good session, really good session. And he was a young lad. So we were coming back up the M6, which was, as usual, delayed. Got to chatting, and I said something about mixed tweaks or something along those lines, and he was absolutely astonished. He said, well, but you're the producer, aren't you? Why are they asking you to do mixed tweaks? I don't go to a restaurant and start shouting instructions through to the chef. So I ended up working with this guy a lot because I like that kind of attitude. So finding people who are really good and, yeah, okay, we all do tweaks, don't we? Probably, apart from Ken, who's always right first time.
No, but I always use a desk. I don't do it in the
exactly.
box, so I can't go
We've
back and
discussed
redo
this,
it. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, finding someone who's really into what you do and who values what you do, who likes what you do, who's followed your career and says, I want to work with this guy because he's the producer for me. You can equally say, right, I want to work with that person. It's not easy to find them, but occasionally, if you swipe the correct direction, I don't use Tinder, so I wouldn't know. But if you go through enough artists, you'll find no. You'll find someone who's compatible with you, and then build that relationship. I think that's my general advice, anyway.
No, that's fair enough. I'm going to go over to yourself, Gary, for the same question. But I know that you've worked with very famous artists from the songwriting level before they've even become recording artists as well. So maybe you can shed a little light on the values that are needed and the attributes.
Sure. So I was signed to Warner Chappell actually for about 25 years as a songwriter, and probably the person that had the biggest, I suppose, impact was Sheryl Crow. So I met Sheryl when she was just like me. She was just a songwriter. She was also a backing singer for Don Henley. I think she was also on that Bad Tour that Michael Jackson did as well. She did the duet. Apparently all he did was in 1 year, he said hello to her once in 1 year. And they were singing a duet on stage in stadium. But anyway, Sheryl, I guess, and it'd be interesting when we come around to get Ken's perspective, is for me, there's this kind of, and I noticed this when I worked with George Michael as well, they were very, very certain, they were very sure about what they wanted from, so when I would sit down and write a song with Sheryl, she was really great at encouraging me without kind of intimidating me, very inclusive, and I guess for me, the enduring thought was her musicality that was coming across. I mean, she's a multi-instrumentalist, so she plays everything. And I guess the confidence thing, it gives you more confidence if you're working with somebody else who has that. And I know we're kind of changing artists here, but just going over to George. The thing with George was he hardly ever demoed anything. In fact, he didn't believe in demos. He just would make the record. And he would carry all the ideas around in his head. And I kind of met him between Faith and Listen Without Prejudice. And he would carry songs around in his head for 6 months before he came to actually record them. And that whole kind of, he could sing me the bass line, he could sing me every part of the song, all of the brass arrangements and everything. And I guess it's that kind of, that completeness, that thing as an artist. Of course, they're open to experimentation, as Ken was, of trying new ways, but they're never allowing, certainly in my experience, they're never allowing the technology to dictate their art. And the other thing I noticed about George was, I remember we stopped using analog and we were using this Mitsubishi 32-track digital tape machine. And I can remember recording some of the songs and thinking, oh, he's only filled up 17 of these tracks. Basically it was, he knew exactly what was needed for the song, communicate the song. And yeah, of course we could have recorded the drums across separate tracks, but he just went, no, just record them in stereo. They sound great. And it's that knowing. And so I guess, I'm talking too much here, but I think you get the idea. But
yeah, absolutely.
It's making a decision, isn't it? That's what's lacking these days.
Absolutely.
No one wants to make a decision, and that's in life as well as in the studio. We've reached the point where technology rules us. We don't rule technology, and if we can use 190 tracks, if there are 190 in our computer, we've got to use every bloody one of them. If we've got 200 plugins, we've got to use them on every single track. We don't. The simpler, the better. I EQ everything on the way into the recording, and then when I come to mix, it's easy. I hardly have to do anything. So it's just make decisions.
Now, started as an artist yourself, obviously going into studios, but now have artists coming in. So what are you looking for with the artists?
Well, so I'll just echo what these guys are saying. I mean, because I still write my own, and I have that horrendous problem where, you drums, and you can always do that, like, and it's a bad thing. I mean, it's good from a creative perspective. Sometimes when I'm working with bands, like completely, I like the prepared. Usually they don't have huge budgets. About being prepared. I mean, if they can send, most bands have the ability to do some kind of demo. These the work, and even for a lot of them, I'll just say, just record me a rehearsal with an iPhone, so I can the arrangement. At least you can think a little bit about what mic to use, what what rooms you'd use for drums, all that kind of stuff. So you can get these ideas, so that you just want to minimize screwing around in the studio, really, and just want to be prepared, have the gear. And I have a good selection of gear, so the band could just come in and use the drums, use selection amps, or they can use theirs. It's up to them, I don't care. But if they want to just come in and plug in, we can be up and running in an hour and try and just crack on and tracking. So, and then it is literally about trying to capture that vibe. And the more you're prepared, and I think the more that you show them that you've in your own time, take time to say, look, I've got the mic set up and I think we're going to do it like this, because I hear this kind of guitar sound and I hear a more 3D kind of sound, so the room mic here, and that's what I'm going for. Might not work, but let's go with that. And I think when you start with that trust, you at least enjoy the element of experimentation. A lot of art long for, like, a lot of bands with big 70s. And okay, we can't mess about our budget, but at least you can demonstrate. And also, if the band can do the same, say, okay, we've recorded rough. Here you are. The rough has helped what we've got. Then you know that they're committed and that they help.
Fabulous, thanks very much. Now, Ian, you work with lots of different people in different parts of the music industry in different forms. So, what qualities are you looking for to know it's going to actually work out for you?
Well, I'm working in mastering. I think I have a slightly different perspective, maybe. So there's a few different answers. I mean, for the first 15 years of my career, I didn't get a choice, because I worked at a studio and I would just work with whatever came, through the door, whatever the sales team booked. So that's, that means you get to work on everything from bagpipe, birdsong to Royal Philharmonic Orchestra or Purple or whatever. Now, if I'm honest, the criteria for whether I'm going to work for somebody or not is whether they're prepared to pay. And that sounds glib, but maybe not immediately, but down the line it could be a useful suggestion for you guys, which literally somebody will email me and say, oh, we're interested in working with you. And sometimes they ask for a charge. Don't, but the first thing I do is I just have an auto response that tells them how I do things and how much I charge. And it's not super expensive, but it's a lot more than some of them expect. And it's not as big as studios in the world. The point of it is not genuinely that I wouldn't work for somebody no money. If I believed in somebody enough and I was able to, then I would. But it's just, it gets rid of the time waste. Because, there are generally people who, even if they think they're going to pay, are only prepared to pay a tiny amount. So it's a useful first question. And you'll then get a reply that says, oh, well, thanks so much, but we can't afford that. And other people, you don't get an answer at all, and time waste. Some people, it's like, yes, let's move forward. Now that I work for myself, I do actually get a choice who I work with. There are very few people I would say I wouldn't work with, partly because, we all have to take the work we have. But also, there are very few things that I don't enjoy. One of the things that I think is important about anything I'm working on is to find something that I'm enthusiastic about. So even if I think music is crap, maybe the kick sound is great, or it's a great vocal performance, or there's a vibe about it, or something, and I can end up being a fan of it by the time I finish working on it. Usually, so really struggling, it's not a big issue. But one thing I would say is that quite often you can tell when somebody gets in touch with you whether or not you're going to enjoy working with them. They're the people who it's kind of like, how much do you charge? And that's great. And then there's people saying, okay, so we've got, one thing about mastering is there's already a product to work on, so I can usually listen to it, kind of, if I really think it's not ready, then I will them, which usually goes down like a balloon. And then there are other times where you just think, oh, this is. And though the advantage of that is that quite often I end up working with them anyway, but at least they know it's going to be. Because, you can tell this is going to be somebody who I'm going to have 12 revisions, which, normally I'll do a couple out of the price. Useful, but that's things that sprang to mind.
I'm sure it is very useful. Mr. Exeter, for yourself then.
Yeah, first and foremost, because I'm doing productions, I look to see whether or not I'm going to be able to get on with these people. I'm going to spend, on average, 12 hours a day in a room with these people in a very, I call it the cock out on the table scenario, which is where everybody's quite happy showing what they've got. There are no egos. There shouldn't be any egos. Everybody's shrinking back here. You can see why. But it's all about establishing the freedom to do your job, because it's incredibly important with artistic people that they're allowed to express themselves without any judgment. And I go in fairly early. I'm in at the songwriting level, whether it's co-writing or just helping them with arrangements. So I will always spend the time to get to know these people. Anybody that's got my number in their phone has probably got, oh God, don't answer, because they know it's going to be a long phone call. But it's about establishing these relationships, because you are going to spend time with people who are trying to do their best work. And once you get that feeling that they're actually going to be comfortable and you can get on with them, because there's going to be stress, there are going to be times of brilliance and whatever. You've got to also establish that they're willing to follow through. They're just not going to be lazy. Because there is no reason, Ken said it, best job in the world. Why would I leave at 6 o'clock in the evening to go to the pub if I could be in the studio finishing doing stuff? Very early on, I was lucky enough to have my name put on releases that went out worldwide. And it's a real focuser when you know that pretty much most of the planet is going to hear something that you've done. And if you left that little blip on tape and didn't spot erase it or any of that shit, that's going to live with you forever just because you were lazy. So I'm looking for the opposite of the laziness. I want people to be as passionate about it as I am, because then you get this relationship where it's exciting. I was bouncing around the studio the other week with this young band. They were great. They were like, "We can't believe you're so into it." And it's like, listen to it. Nobody knows how good, but that's what it should be. Hair should go up on the back of your arms. And I'm looking for that from the artist. So it's really building that initial relationship. Very rarely had to deal with art because of that process.
That's brilliant. Ken, I'm interested to know if you've got anything to add, but I'm also interested if you could think of one of the artists that you've worked with and some of the specific qualities that they had that made it work.
Talent being number one. Look, there's no doubt about it. If the Beatles are the first thing on your list, then good people tend to come towards you. So that was a blessing for me, starting with them. Things that people brought. Guitarist. Best guitarist I've ever worked with is a gentleman by the name of Steve Morse, an American, that I worked with him on 2 albums with a band called the Dixie Dregs. And we ran out of time in the studio. So what finished up happening, when the studio finished at like 2 o'clock in the morning, the people that had the day would finish at 2, we'd get a phone call and we'd go in and we'd work till 10 o'clock in the morning to try and finish this off. And Steve, I lived fairly close to the studio at the time, and Steve would come round and hang out at my place. We'd be watching TV. The entire time, he had the guitar around his neck, and he was just practicing scales the entire time. He did this constantly. That's why he was good. The Beatles, why they were good, playing 3 shows a night, 6 nights a week, for months on end in Germany. You have to work your craft. It isn't something that just comes easily. Luckily enough, my work came with the Beatles, and it was experimenting, and it's what they wanted, but it was still work. Bowie, what he brought number one, well, just to go back, when we first started to work together as producer and artist or co-producers, neither of us had really produced anything before. So we were both ridiculously nervous going into this, not knowing quite what our roles were, how it would all come together. But as we started to put things down and our ideas started to come together and we could hear this is working, our confidence grew and grew and grew. So it gave us a freedom. Once again, that freedom that I got with the Beatles, I got with Bowie. Bowie was bored in the studio. He didn't like to take a long time there. Now, this is at a time when all musicians' contracts with record companies were they had to come up with an album every 6 months. That meant writing the material, rehearsing the material, going to the studio recording, touring, writing material for the next album, all within 6 months, repeating time and time again. Elton, Bowie, they all went through this thing, one album every 6 months. So they were under pressure the entire time, but Bowie put pressure on himself as well as everyone else. We knew he would teach a song to the band, and they knew they had like maybe 3 or 4 takes to get it, because if they didn't get it by take 4, you know what, guys, it's not working, we'll move on to another one. Now, he could do that because vocally, he was the best performer in the studio I've ever worked with. I co-produced 4 albums with him, and 95% of the vocals that I did with him were one take, first take, beginning to end. I would start the tape rolling, get the level, get the sound, take the tape back, hit record. What he did that one time through is what you still hear today. No auto-tune, no moving around. It's just his performance. And it's not always perfectly in tune. It's not always perfectly in time, but it all came from here. This is where it should always come from, down there. The soul of something. The thing that sells records, the things that make act popular, used to anyway, was A, the song, and B, the performance. If you don't have that performance, no one's going to believe it, and they don't get behind it quite as much. The lasting things, anyway. Obviously, there are things like Disco Duck and things like that the performance was for shit, and people forgot it after 3 weeks. It sold a lot in that 3 weeks, though. But for lasting immortality type records, you've got to have that performance as well as the music. The sound, yeah, that as engineers, we're just adding the icing on the cake. I don't think there are many records that have sold because they sounded so good if the material and the performance wasn't there. It all comes first off from them.
Thanks very much, Ken. Thank you. Okay, I think it's about time we had some questions, which is over to you. So if you are to stick your hand in the air, we can come to you. Is there anything you want to ask of anybody? Don't all shout at once. I know that you're just being kind to the people next to you because you don't want to interrupt them. That's okay.
I'll come round with the microphone.
Nobody.
You can if you want, but Russ is going to be a bit embarrassed, but he has got his vet's gloves with him.
If somebody could bring a table.
Or a tape measure. And some binoculars.
Is there anything anybody wants to know that... there's a hand at the back. Great. Is there a mic with it? Yes.
Yeah. Just a question on behalf of my friend here. He wants to know, how did you go about getting the right kind of experience? Because that's the issue that he's facing at the minute. Mainly for the studio recording experience, isn't it?
So how do you get the experience? Is there anyone in particular you'd like to answer that first?
No, anybody?
Okay. Who fancies throwing that one and answer to that one? Go for it. You haven't spoke for a while.
I'll be quick.
Go.
You go to the best place you can possibly go to. That is absolutely my advice, because I wasted too long. messing around with small studios, messing around with people who weren't interested. So, you know, a lot of it's luck, but I think we've all got access to. We can communicate with anyone in the world pretty much these days. So, in terms of finding experience, you know, approach the people you really want to go with first. I mean, apply to Abbey Road or whatever, because, you know, that is the sky's the limit. And obviously, you have special sort of considerations that you need to put into place, but that doesn't mean you can't be the next big super producer. No way. You can, you know, anyone can do it if they've got the intent and the love for the music, I think.
The thing that I'll add to that is once you get that gig, learn, just stand there, sit there, do whatever you have to do, but learn from what goes on in the studio, different producers, different engineers, because we all work in different ways. And the only way you'll find your own sound, your own way of working, is watching these other people and oh yeah, that works for me, but oh no, I couldn't do it that way. And that was one of the things as an engineer learning, experimenting with the Beatles. I'd watched these other engineers before me, and I knew that Norman Smith would mic up the drums this way, that Stuart Elton would mic up Norman Smith would mic up the drums that way, and Stuart Elton would mic up the strings this way. Why don't I try putting the two together? It was picking from other people and finding the things that work. But the only way I could do that was to watch these people and listen and learn from them in the first place.
I think the thing that I was going to say was obviously the challenge these days is probably getting through the door. I mean, I wasn't in a position to go to the best place I could find when I was starting out because I was in Lowestoft on the East Coast, not the cultural hub of the universe. Aldborough, a few miles south, is pretty cultural. But anyway, well, actually, I tell a lie. The Darkness came from Lowestoft, so went to my school. Still not there with the cultural hub, are we? Anyway, they were pretty successful for a bit. Two things. One is this is a suggestion I heard from someone else, which is to try and show up in person. You know, these days we can connect with almost anybody in the world, but so can everybody else. And I think there's something to be. So for me, I mentioned the studio I worked for free at. It was just around the corner. It was based in the community theatre. And initially I went to talk to Paul and said I'd love to help out. And he was like, I'm really sorry, I've got somebody helping me. I don't need any help. So I then started going along on Tuesday evenings after school where he ran a thing. I think he paid £1 to get to use samplers and you know, Juno keyboards and all the rest of it. So I just went in there and played around and made rubbish imitations of Brian Eno, oddly enough. But just don't play him any. The point I'm getting to is I kept going to that, even though he had said no. I kept turning up. Every time I turned up, I said, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. You know, because, I mean, this is great. And eventually he was like, oh, do you know what? Could you? And so I was helpful to him. And that carried on for months until the person who was currently there left, the point somebody else made earlier. And then he said, well, you know what? Now I could do with a hand if you fancy it. And that was what I needed to. And then I just made myself useful to him. And that got me the chance to watch what he did. That was the start of it. And then, you know, later on when I wrote all those letters and somebody called in for a reference, I got an amazing reference. So I think, you know, turning up in person so that somebody, because it's much harder to say no to somebody to their face, just on a practical level, than it is to an email. You know, you can just not reply to an email, or you can have a stock reply or whatever. And it also, it's a personal thing. Anyway, another recurring theme here is relationship, you know, and you get to look somebody in the eye. They get to look you in the eye, see that you're serious, committed, and you're passionate and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think turn up in person and then persistently attempt to be helpful without being annoying, I guess would be a... Keep your mouth shut is the other bit of that ingredient. Yeah, just sit
being
there and
annoying.
wait for permission to help, I guess. Offer it, then wait for the invitation.
Yeah, I mean, I think life's changed a little bit in the industry. The studios aren't so prevalent anymore, but it can start here. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who are musicians. There's a whole bunch of people who want to engineer, and why not meet each other and actually start practicing doing stuff. I mean, I'll get in trouble with the powers that be, because when I was at college, I crawled over broken glass to get in the studio. I hit up instructors, I played on sessions, I did anything to be in the studio. 20 hours a day. I took like a day off maybe a week because I had to rest and do my studies. I was always around the studios. And you can do that. And I know there's strict rules that you've got to adhere to. But why not just start getting your practice now? Ask people. Take advantage of that opportunity, because pretty much you're in a nice, lovely environment. I mean, I've done stuff in these studios. They're beautiful. But eventually you're going to graduate, and you're going to be out in the world competing with everybody else that's graduated. So if you start making that effort now, you'll go far. And it's that whole thing of just spend the time doing what you love rather than waiting for it all to happen.
Can I just say it's really pleasing to see that there's quite a lot of people in the room who are recognised from having been in the studios where I do my radio show, just doing work experience, and have been there just to see how we do it. Because you do actually have to be around to be there at the right moment, when quite a few of us just happened to be there when the engineer left and ended up being engineers. So you do have to just keep doing that. So come back again, get some more experience, get involved again. And also, one thing I found in the music industry, it's a lot easier to ask somebody if they fancy having a cup of tea, especially if you're paying, than asking them for anything else that you actually want. So you might just want to say, can we have a cup of tea and a chat? I'd say yes. Anything to add on that question?
Yeah, I guess for me, when I started as an assistant, I was first in and probably last out, and my job was to second guess what I thought people wanted. And actually it was interesting. So I was working with a group of students yesterday, and they're all just standing around, and I was doing this session with another engineer, and I fell into my assistant mode where I was rolling up cables and I was moving mics and things, and I was doing it all without even thinking about it. And I suddenly thought, why am I doing this kind of stuff? Because that's the sort of that kind of gets you noticed. And certainly for me at Trident, I would finish my sessions maybe 11, 1 in the morning, and then I would start working on this thing, Fairlight sampler. There was no mouse or anything. It was all command line stuff. So I had to teach myself how to do this. And quite often I would 2 hours sleep back to the session the next day. But I was just so hungry to learn, and just, I guess, to experiment, find out what the possibilities of the studio. So I guess to have that inquisitive mind is.
Just quickly, when we were talking about assistants, it cannot be understated the importance of team making, as well as doing all the rolling up cables and operating Pro Tools for producer. And so my assistant is my go-to assistant out of about 4 people I use, is the one who is always aware of keeping the studio quiet, making sure everyone is fed and watered. She's amazing on Pro Tools. She's amazing at miking up and taking mics down, putting things away, rolling cables. But the team making is honestly the key thing, because it's about interacting, isn't it? It's about making it an experience for the artist. Making everything flow nice and smooth.
We really need to get off tea, unless somebody's got any. Okay. Can we have another question, please? Can we get the mic over there? Oh, right, okay. And we'll come to that other one straight after this, yeah.
I just wanted to ask whether you would take an opportunity on an artist that may not be as well recognized, but would offer you a sum of money that was okay, but might not be the amount that you want. If you saw potential in them, would you work with them? Let's say they offered you, I don't know how much you would want, but I'm just saying, let's say you want $2,000 and they offered you $1,000, would you work with them?
Who would you like to direct it to?
Anyone.
Yeah, I do it all the time. I've got some high-profile clients, and there's been a lot of recognition of my work, and people assume that I'm too expensive, and they never ask the question. And I'll happily work with people as long as they're going to contribute something back, you know, even if it's expenses. A long time ago, going on with the tea making, which we're back to, but it's like, you know, feed me. Make sure that I don't go hungry while I'm working. I'll come and I'll do all of the stuff beforehand. I'll do rehearsal sessions with you. I'll help you before you go in the studio. That's part of what I do. And then book the studio, and if you've got anything left over, pay me. You're not going to get 3 weeks out of me, but you might get a few days, and you'll certainly get the experience of doing a proper job and having fun. So I'm always open to working with people. If it's something that is relevant to my tastes, you know, I've got fairly wide taste, but I'm no good with rap. You know, I don't do electronic. But if it's recording bands and getting them playing together in a studio, yeah, absolutely.
I've done it in various ways. I have worked with a band that were nobody, basically, for free for some time. Done demos with them, chopped a deal with them, then put out, because they didn't get signed, put out the record ourselves, and then finally got signed. And the particular act I'm thinking of, an American act, we finished up selling 800,000 units, which was really good for an unknown band. Then they thought they'd done it all themselves and dumped me. I've taken bands on that were for nothing and taken them to the point of signing a record deal, and they dump you. Artists are eventually going to dump you. Get used to that immediately. But these days, it's interesting you're saying about the feeding and just bringing apart. I now teach at Leeds Beckett University, and one of the things that I do quite often is masterclasses there, where an act will come in and we'll record 1 or 2 tracks. They get to use the track for however they want to use it. The university gets to use it for promotion if they want to. It's been very interesting because there is absolutely none of that. I find it difficult finding an act that I like to bring in, that I feel I can give something to. It's difficult to find the act in the first place. They come in, we're working, and then nothing. It's weird that there's not, I have yet to find with any of the acts that I brought into the university to record, I've yet to find that need. I know it's there, but for some reason, if it's free, it's not important. That's another reason for asking, well, this is how much I charge. If someone charges for something, it's more. It really is valuable. It means something to them. They'll only get it if it's only valuable to them if they have to pay for it. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
it.
I agree. Just to add to that, I mean, I would also absolutely work with people that. Yes, do it, but only if you believe in them. And if, I mean, this is going to sound slightly mercenary, and I'm having mentioned money for the first time, and now I'm talking money again. I feel like I'm going to be completely mercenary. But I do run a website where there's a ton of free information, so I am a nice person, honest. But you've got to look at it as a kind of cost benefit. Right? You can't do free work for everybody all of the time. Like, I would like to do more work at a lower price for people I believed in. I don't have that luck. It's like successful at what I do and getting by fine. And a couple of times, like, I mixed an album for a friend of mine last year. Loved it. Was so much fun. And it took so much time in comparison to what I normally do, and I was struggling to get it done to the standard that I wanted for them. I haven't kind of made that commitment. So you need to look at, it's not just the first person who comes along and offers you some work. Another practical way to make it work is to be careful not to set your price too low. Obviously, when you're starting out, it can be different, and you might want to just do some work free so that you have a portfolio. Because another thing, an opportunity that you have on a course like this is to build up evidence of your abilities. This can help with getting experience later on, with getting your foot in the door. If you can say, look, I did this, yes, the course is worth something. But for me, if somebody, I'm interested in seeing what else. So evidence of that is sufficient. So sometimes you will do work for free in order to get, and then you've got a benefit, right? The cost for you is your time, benefit is your portfolio. At the point where you're actually charging and trying to make it a commercial thing, one thing you can do is make your list price considerably higher than your bottom line, right? So there will be times when, yes, you want to help somebody and do the work for less, but you still need to be able to get food on the table and pay the rent. And maybe you do that by the paying jobs. You do enough of them that there's time that you can just say, okay, give something back. Or maybe it's the list rate this, and then you have a discounted rate to give people who you really like, feel, I want to help. So, yes, absolutely do it, but be aware. Kind of got to be pragmatic. Got to be worth your while, and you somehow got to figure out.
Splits. Talking about splits.
Don't get me started. Yeah, so I've been in plenty of songwriting situations. Actually, I had a number 2 record in America with a guy who none of you will have heard of. He sadly died 2 weeks ago, called Eddie Money. Eddie Money. And yeah, probably for a week I wasn't a writer on a song that I wrote. Because, so in other words, just going back to some of the stuff Ken was talking, I think you have to be smart, you have to protect yourself. And certainly something that I've seen more in the digital, it's more prevalent in the digital, is that a very common practice is for a record to ask for a backing track. Beware backing track. So beware stems. Very dangerous, yeah? And the next thing you know is that your guitar stems or your backing vocal stems are on someone else's record. Or on someone else's record. So I think you just have to have this level of, you have to know a sense of your own worth, which is kind of going. I think you have to establish the rules from the first moment when you walk into the studio. So I had a situation. I don't do a lot of reality TV pop, but I did agree to do some. And there were 2 of us writing a song, and there wound up being, I think it was 14 of us for record at the end. And literally somebody wrote one line in the chorus, then somebody wrote another line in the chorus. And that really was the point where I left and went into academia and thought, I don't really want a part of this. Because actually you don't make any money. I mean, you make very little money these days anyway from songwriting. And that for me, just, my alarm bells went off, I guess. I just thought, yeah, I'll do it, but really the rules are very, very established. Set in stone.
Can I just say in response to that as well, that there's quite a lot of artists who I know who, through my radio show, etc., who are in receipt of funding through various projects, things like the PRS Foundation, to get money to record and make music, and through the Arts Council as well. Some of the experimental musicians who I work with are working with them. I mean, actually the Arts Council not directly, but with support from them, usually for the other things that are around the music, like the installation they might be putting in. Now, in those situations, it's really important to know exactly how much the real price is, because then it can be used as match funding. So if you're putting on your bid that this person's going to do it for £1 because they like me, you've just had a massive loss, really. Because if you'd known the real price and you could have said, well, this is £10,000 and they are match funding my operation by 9,000 of that, then someone else could, or they're funding in kind about 9,000 of that, then someone else can match fund it. But none of that will work unless you can do a real budget, and to do that you've got to know the real price. So it's really useful, and people like Ian will tell you what the real price is up front. And also, one last thing I wanted to say on this as well, as a session drummer in studios, and mainly stage stuff, but a lot of studio stuff as well, I got paid to play on the ones that I was either offered it or just didn't like it very much, so that I could get the money to play on the ones which I wanted to play on because I was a fan of it. The last gig I did at Bonus Arena with somebody who's in this room, it actually cost me a couple of £100 to do that gig as the drummer on the stage, simply because I'm a real fan of that artist. And it's one thing, it's great to jump around at the front at their gigs. Nothing compares to jumping around on the stage at those gigs. So I think everyone here is a fan of music, and it's something that makes us buzz. So if the music's good, there's always room for negotiation. Any other questions? Yeah, the one at the back that we didn't get last time. Yeah, up there. Hello.
Hello. Is there a specific piece of equipment that has resonated with any of you individually, be it a microphone or a sampler or even a synthesizer or a preamp that's really made you realise that's why I do this job, or that's what's got me into music or producing or audio in general in the first place?
Go on, Ken.
Big question, I know, sorry.
The thing that has kept me going for 55 years is music. It's not the gear. That means absolutely sweet fuck all, quite honestly. These tech heads that you got to have this, you got to have that, it's all bullshit. There have been some amazing sounding records that have not sold a bean, that don't mean anything because the song and the performance wasn't there. Getting back to that, there have been terrible sounding records that have sold a fortune because that performance that the artist gave is just amazing. It's for me, there are certain things that I like to use, but quick example, the band that I was talking about that we eventually sold 800,000 units, it was an American band called Missing Persons. And the reason that I got the band was the drummer used to play with Frank Zappa. And I was friends with the Sabbath family, and they phoned up one day saying that this guy had formed a band. They thought I might be interested to hear it. That's how it all started. And the demos that we did in Frank's new studio. He just had it built, and he knew my reputation for finding faults in the studio. So he wanted to come back off the road and go straight into the studio to record. So put me in there for free for just doing demos. I'll find all the faults. We'll sit around whilst they're fixed. He can come back in, and it's working perfectly. So that was great for us. He used to record every one of his shows, and he had all of his top line mics out on the road with him. So for the demos that we did, I had the B mics. I can't remember what they were, but they're certainly not what I would usually use. It finished up that 4 of the tracks that we did, the demos that we did, finished up on the album, which the rest of the album was done with the mics and the gear that I would normally use. You can't tell the bloody difference. It's not the equipment that does it, it's the musicians and us and our ears. Every engineer would do things differently, every producer would do things differently, but we have the ability to, hopefully we have the ability to pull out the best in the gear and in the artist. And it's that's important, it's not the gear.
I'll second that. One of the slogans of my mastering course, and mastering is a field where there really is a lot of emphasis placed on the gear, is it ain't what you use, it's the way that you use it. And might be, yeah. I genuinely believe that even in a field like mastering, especially with the modern technology, I mean, we were talking just before we came out here this afternoon about the fact that, you know, a modern laptop already exceeds the technical specifications of probably the gear that was in Abbey Road in the 60s. You know, so you have that. You can't make a good record with that, then you're doomed. I recorded an album when I was at college on an 8-track Tascam cassette multi-tracker. So it squeezed 8 tracks of audio onto a cassette. And I dug out the tape last year and I listened to it. Pretty good, considering, you know, the limitations are the performances and the instruments and all the rest of it. Nothing to do with the gear. So I'm going to back up everything that Ken says. The only thing I would say is that in mastering, the speakers are incredibly important. So it's not, and that applies throughout. The speakers and the listening environment needs to be of a reasonable standard. But I think as with all of these things, there's a point where stuff is good enough, which is probably a lot cheaper than most people think. You know what? And after.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just echoing again, but I've done the trips around universities and sort of gone to do either visits or masterclasses or whatever, and we've been tasked with doing a certain thing, and then it's been like, well, why don't we just have some fun? And mixing's boring, right? Watching someone mix is just boring because you've got to be in your headspace. So why don't we just get a drum kit out? Oh, the drum kit's not very good. We haven't got all the microphones, so we just pulled all the microphones out in the room and systematically gone through and made incremental improvements with what we have. And every single time we've done it, people have had their jaws on the floor because they've heard this kit that normally sounds like dog shit sound brilliant. And it's attitude, performance, and listening. Just, that doesn't sound very good. Let's swap it out. It's going back to that laziness thing. People want to do stuff, that people want these robot mic things that move it for you. Walk out in the fucking room and move it yourself. Trust your ears.
Isn't that an assistant engineer?
I think it was, yeah. But it's just, don't, gear's great. Gear allows us to do what we do, but it isn't the be all and end all. It's capturing emotion. That's it. Music is emotion. So, yeah. Sorry, I feel like we're lecturing you now. Sorry.
I was just following on from that and what we were talking before about being experienced as an engineer, how ridiculously hard it is for any of you to get experience in an actual studio these days, because it's few and far between. And the kind of limitations you have of time, of being able to use the university facilities. That the suggestion I would have is maybe buying fairly just bog standard couple of condensers and just go into a band that you really like and just saying, okay, we'll record the rehearsal, set up a couple of mics. Okay, it won't be brilliant, but it'd be better than what they could do on an iPhone. And maybe you start with that, you build on that, you start moving the mics around the room and think, actually, that's pretty cool if I put it over here and that. And you just kind of work on that. And again, that's kind of going back to maybe, some bands have done great records like that, so maybe that's a way for people to start in a much more accessible way of being able to get out and get engineering.
Thanks very much. Sir, did you want to add anything? Favourite bit of kit?
I don't really have a favourite bit of kit, but the one thing I was going to say here, for me, I've often used gear for purposes for which they weren't designed. So the idea of misappropriation is a big part of music production for me. So particularly the Fairchild, I always remember, this always interests me because we've got all these metaphors in the digital reference point from the whole analog digital thing, which drives me bonkers. And it often occurred to me that I didn't really like the sound of the Fairchild very much, actually, but I thought it was great at colouring the audio. And of course, when you load up a plug-in, there's an expectation that if the needle isn't moving, that it isn't doing anything. So I guess the meaning for me is important, the meaning of, and often that gets lost between the purpose of a piece of gear and what I wind up using it. So quite often that'll be a very, very different thing. It could even be a plug-in that was maybe designed for guitars that happens to sound great on drums or vocals or something. I don't know. I'm always thinking, how shouldn't I use this rather than how should I use it? I'm always trying to think of, the opposite. Coming at this from a slightly the opposite angle.
Was there anything you wanted to add from your studio point of view?
Feeling bad now you asked that question. Whatever makes the job easier, and obviously we can't record records without some gear, but I really don't care what the gear is. I endorse a particular audio workstation because it makes my life really, really easy. And there's no plugging here. I developed some plugins which currently I'm just using privately because it makes my life really easy. But you've just got to think about what the record is. I mean, Ken gave me some advice a number of years ago. I was stuck in the middle of this horrible metal record. I was doing 2 albums at the time, one for Sony and one an independent act, and I was getting no end of trouble off them both. And Ken said to me, don't try and mix them with something in as a target. Just embrace them with what you have, what the record is, and what it should sound like on the moment, So I did that, and I think one of them was mixed on like a low-end analog mixer, like a low-end portable analog mix, not the B-word one of the other low-end analog mixers. It sounded great. It doesn't matter what you use, you might get a bit more noise floor, but yeah, just embrace it. And I think mics favourite saying that he often says to me is, "No one ever whistled the sound of a preamp."
I don't want to labour the point, but well, I'll labour the point really quickly. So I've literally mastered thousands of albums at this point, and it's genuinely true that some of the best sounding and most emotional, just the best things that I have worked on were recorded in bedrooms and living rooms, and some of the worst sounding were recorded in some of the best studios in the country, genuinely. And the other thing that occurs to me is that it always makes me laugh when people email me to compliment me on the vocal sound on my podcast, because it's me in my converted garage with a couple of acoustic panels and a USB mic that cost £100. And actually,
underwear.
One other thing.
You can hear him smiling, you see. It's all in the performance.
That same mic, I have a local producer who said, "Oh, emergency, need to record these vocals." I was like, "I don't have a recording studio, I can't help you." And she was like, "Well, we've got to do something." So she came in, and this mic is the only mic I have. So we used it. In fact, I put it up in stereo configuration because it turned out 2 vocalists. I thought, this is never going to work. It sounded great. Worked fine. You know, we had to move the mic around a bit. Move the mic, listen, move the mic. Doesn't matter what the mic is.
If we can't make a good mic for cheap after 50 years of experience, then, you know, we have a problem, don't we? Or a decent mic for cheap. I won't give up my Neumanns yet.
Can I do moan zone? One thing, faders. Faders are the most important thing for me, right? Because we move things around to get balances. I'm correct in saying we were balance engineers in the day. So it's all about setting levels and making stuff speak at the right time. And it's an intuitive parallel process, if you want. Sitting with a mouse on a 48 input console, looking at a screen, moving one fader at a time, thinking you're mixing, it's like totally taking you out of where you should be, which is shutting your eyes, pushing stuff around and feeling what needs to happen. And it's a real pet peeve of mine because it's got to be this emotive thing that you're doing in a reaction to what you're hearing. So again, while you're here, push some faders around. You know, it's such a different thing.
As an academic these days, I have to listen to students' recordings and pass comment. And invariably, the one comment I will make is that you mixed it in the box, didn't you? Because the vocal is at one level throughout. It will start off, it might be a bit too loud because the track is quiet, then the track builds, and the vocal's at the perfect level with the track. Then the track keeps on building, and suddenly you can't hear the vocal enough. And when I mix, I'm playing with the vocal for every word, every syllable, to make sure it's exactly the right level that I want it at. And I probably will run through a mix just for the vocal, like 50 times, just learning all of the different points of where it needs to be pushed up and where it needs to be pulled back. So yeah, whenever you can, use faders, absolutely.
But if you can't use faders, use automation and clip gain to do the same thing. And to pick up on Ken's point, I often say, you know, a song's not finished until there's a reason it sounds the way that it sounds in every single bar. And I have a little theory. There's lots of people overusing multiband compression these days and limiting and just slamming everything up, part of the loudness wars. And one of the reasons I think is that kind of automatically a little bit does that. You know, when the level of the song drops overall, everything comes up, and then the loud bit comes in and gets pulled back. And that's kind of the machine doing what you should be doing for emotional reasons and for reasons. So yeah, if you can't get faders, just imagine you've got faders and think about what you would be doing.
Well, we're up to time, I'm afraid. I'll just say that Andrew here will remember that when me and my BBC crew came to do our show live from here, our eyes popped out of our heads when we saw the studio equipment that you have on site. It's incredible. It's so far in advance of what we use at work, and you're really, really lucky to have it. You need to get yourself in there as often as you can do if you are a student here. When I asked for equipment 10 years ago and taken over as an engineer, they said, no, we'll send you to do mic placements at Maidavale, which has served me well. We finally just got a 32-track Behringer desk, that took 10 years to get that. have a look at what you've got in your studio, things you could do in here. It's amazing. Thank you to all of our guests. Could we just give them a round of applause all as one? Andrew, can I give you this mic?
If I could just add to that, please. I mean, thank you again to all the guests. Fine. You were here, so it's great to see you back here. Special thanks to Alan, as I mentioned before. I completely we had to sort of wing it because there were some changes and lineups and things like that. But being a consummate professional, you wouldn't have noticed because he's absolutely great at it. The BBC introducing thing that we do here each year, the live broadcast, is one of the highlights of our year, I think. I think all the students that have taken part over the years is very much so. I have to say a special thanks to Mike Banks as well. I think we'll find him, he's just there. Mike is the guy that makes things happen all the time, and he's often just in the background and he never gets any thanks. So could just thank those people as well, please. And also, I suppose I should mention as well, you know, people in the music industry are often very generous with their time. So all the people that we have here today have given up their time for free today, which I think tells you a lot. We have at 4 o'clock today, which you're very welcome to come to, Mind on the Run, which is a Basil Kirschen documentary, which will run to about 4:45. Brian Eno will be here for that part, and he's going to say a few words with our Professor of Composition, Alistair Borthwick, about Basil Kirschen at the end. And then at 6 o'clock this evening, of course, we've got the talk with Brian Eno, but if you haven't got tickets for that already, I think they're pretty much gone, because it was one of those things where we just put it on the Facebook page of the music website, and within 4 hours they all just disappeared. That wasn't something we needed to advertise. You might be lucky if there are any returns at the last minute, but at the moment I think the event is already sold out. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks for your questions. Really, thanks for engaging. And maybe we'll see you at 4 o'clock. Thank you.